we've got Simi on the line, and she has a question for Madam State's Attorney. And Simi is calling from the Las Vegas metropolitan area. Simi, you're on Straight No Chaser.
Yes. Madam, I wanted to ask you about, with everything going on, we're talking about community. What was your opinion? What were your thoughts about everything that happened in regards to Breonna Taylor and the way that was processed? What would you have done maybe differently if you would have done something differently? And what do you feel that the community can continue to do to make sure she's not forgotten?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Simi, for that question, because we should not, and I know I will never forget Breonna Taylor. I would say that that case is very concerning to those of us in law enforcement who, really, because the preservation of life, and I think Mike Blow will agree, it has to be number one.
Absolutely.
The preservation of life. And what struck me most about that case was, why were the police there in the first place? Why was a warrant being executed on the home or the residence of Breonna Taylor? And when you peel back those layers, you kind of look at the fact that, from my understanding, she had an ex-boyfriend who was a suspected drug dealer who she was no longer with, okay? And he was arrested earlier, I guess, that day. And then they had a warrant based on information that perhaps there were packages or mail that was delivered for him to her residence. Now, when those packages were delivered, I don't believe it was recent. How were they big packages, meaning were they, packages that may have indicated that there was some type of illegal substance being mailed to her home, or was it a small packet, or was it just mail? That information, I think, no one is really, I don't think there are any really good answers to that. I think that the basis upon which the search warrant was obtained is very questionable, because when we look at search warrants, especially when we agree to approve a no-knock search warrant, we're looking for things like, like the evidence that whatever you're looking for, if it's drugs, if it's weapons or whatever, that you have a sufficient basis to believe it exists in that home. So you can't look and say, okay, well, 4 or 5 months ago they were together. I think he had some packages delivered a month ago or 2 months ago, or even in some cases a week ago, because you're not likely to find it there, right? So the likelihood that whatever you're looking for would actually be present in the home depends a lot on the time between when you think something was delivered and the time in which you seek that search warrant. So I think there were a lot of problems, with the basis upon which that search warrant was issued. I also think the way that it was executed was problematic, because one of the first things that officers do or should do is do surveillance. The fact that they were not aware that her current boyfriend was at her residence and they were surprised by his presence is actually problematic for them, because they should have done appropriate and proper surveillance to determine who was in the home at the time. The fact that they got a no-knock search warrant simply because they believed that there was contraband in the apartment, again, is another issue, because when you talk about no-knock search warrants, you're talking about potentially entering into a very dangerous, highly volatile, potentially situation. And do you do that simply to preserve property or to preserve evidence? And those are the questions that I think, legislatures around the country and the federal government is looking at. I think the problem with that whole case is that the officers should have never been there in the first place. I could probably do a whole show about my concerns around the Graham versus Connor decision and how that impacts how prosecutors look at use of force and determine whether or not to prosecute for excessive use of force, because the Graham versus Connor decision is very narrow. What it essentially says is, at the time the force is used, was it objectively reasonable to believe that the force that was used was necessary based on the circumstances at the time the force is used. So if you use deadly force because you reasonably believe that your life or the lives of others were threatened, or that you or someone else could be seriously harmed or killed, then lethal force or deadly force is allowable. And in that case, what happened was, after they entered, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, who wanted to protect himself and Breonna, had a gun, legally registered gun, and shot at those who were intruding into their apartment, because that's what he believed, that these were intruders. And so he did shoot at them. And at the time that the officers returned fire, it was objectively reasonable. If you're just using the Graham versus Connor decision, it's objectively reasonable for that officer at the time they shot back to believe that their lives were in danger. That's just, unfortunately, how the courts have ruled, and that is the guiding case law on use of force. I think there are a lot of concerns that we have seen around how that standard that was decided by the Supreme Court applies, not just in the Breonna Taylor case, but in Eric Gardner case and so many other cases where you see individuals who were either stopped for misdemeanors, most of them had no weapons, how lethal force was used against them. And that standard, that objective reasonableness standard, has been applied to really protect a lot of bad actions of officers. And so we are really looking at, in Maryland, about establishing some uniform use of force standards, adding additional conditions for officers, ensuring that de-escalation training is standard across our state. And then mainly looking at also how we allow officers to use tools of law enforcement that can create dangerous situations, like no-knock warrants, search warrants in general. There's an inherent dangerousness when you are executing a search warrant, because you're intruding into someone's property and you don't know what's behind the wall or on the other side of that door. So there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the Breonna Taylor case. But I think the one that I think all of us just struggle to understand is, why were the officers there in the first place? No drugs found, no contraband found. It's just such a tragedy.
Mike, can I add something for Simi to give some thought to?
Certainly.
This maybe gives you all an idea when I talk about the things that the states and I have done for years. What disturbs me a great deal is that you have police officers like this who patrol your streets. I would really like to say to our communities throughout the country, and we heard this from President Obama, we have got to learn how to organize our communities. We have to set standards in our communities that the police understand. Too many of our communities are defined by crime because that's the easy thing to do. So I would say to everyone, let's not let the name of Breonna Taylor be in vain. Let's look at how we can unite a community, organize a community, and make certain that those who service that community serve it with the standard that the people deserve. This is a great time to say to Simi and everybody else, it is time to vote. It is simply time to vote. We have to stand up, and I've tried to end most of your shows, Mike, with this, and I try to say it to this organization. If Black Lives Matter, we need to act like it. Let's go to the polls and let's vote. You have to have people, and listen, our state's attorney stands on her own, but you need to elect people who are going to represent your community as she represents her home. That's what has to happen. You have to have people who care about yours just like they care about their own. So, saying to your listeners,
sure,
there are different parts of this that have to come into play. That officer should have never been allowed to serve those people. That's a problem. You have a district attorney, I don't really know what he could have been thinking about. But these are things that the people can change. Unite, organize, and vote.
So with that being said, what is your stand on voting? What do you think the outcome of this election is going to look like? How do you think it's going to look?
Is that
Well, let
question?
me just say, I hope that there's a bison in the White House.
All right.
And the tuition at Howard University will be sky high. Let me tell you this. I had a good conversation with a person today. There were people who said Barack Obama didn't do this, he didn't do that. Well, he didn't turn the world over the way we wanted it to. But one of the things Barack Obama did was he got us ready for number 45. We see something that most of us could never have. But he is as lethal as COVID-19. Just as we could never have believed in such a disease, we could never believe that America would be stuck with a president such as him. Here is my thought. I think we've got a wake-up call, and I think America is woke. I believe that. I think that America is going to do what America needed to do before Barack Obama, before George Bush, before Bill Clinton. They're going to start giving attention to who's in that White House, who is the Attorney General, who are the senators. It is not all about, and when we talk about educating our children, and we have this conversation with our children, we teach the children in our program the 13th Amendment. You have to know how important your vote is. I would say to you, Shannon, let not this election be solely about number 45, because the truth is, Mitch McConnell, who is the senator in the same place where Breonna Taylor lives, somebody's got to ask, how did he happen? And why are we not looking at him and raising as much noise about him? Because if it were not for him, 45 could never have done the things that he's done. So you have to look at the Tillersons in North Carolina. You have to look at Lindsey Graham. We have to understand why this vote matters. Do I think it's going to change? Here's what I hope. I hope on November 4th, the federal marshals are standing at the gate of 1600 telling him, you all got to come out of here. But more than that, I hope that down ballot turns all blue. I hope that in North Carolina, South Carolina, and in Georgia, in places like Alabama, where we now have black mayors, I look at our female mayors across this country. It is time for that change that Barack Obama told us about. I believe that's what we're getting ready to see. I think this, Shannon, if this vote, if we don't do what is right, that ship that you all are too young to remember the ship back to Africa that everybody in 1960 talked about. If this vote don't go the right way, we better start building that ship because we got to get up out of here. So for you all on this show